When you're thinking about supply chains and the many tiers in a supply chain, what happens is when you have more tiers in the supply chain, its vulnerability to this bullwhip effect increases. So you get this bullwhip effect occurring more and more unless you do something about it when you have more and more layers in the supply chain, when you have more and more tiers in the supply chain. So what exactly is the bullwhip effect? Let's take a small example here and see what it means. So you have, you can think of any product and you have customers for that product buying the product, and there will be some variability in the demand there. So over time, there's going to be some variability in what the customer purchases. They'll be purchasing from a retailer, and the retailer in turn is going to place orders to the wholesaler. Now, the retailer will have some information about day-to-day sales and is going to incorporate that information and pass on the orders to the retailer based on that. Think about this. The customer buys every day, many times in a day, or customers buy many times in the day. A retailer probably places orders to the wholesaler in a normal sense, in a conventional sense, maybe once a week, maybe once every 3 days. So there's going to be some periodic difference between when customers buy and when retailers place orders to the wholesaler. And if you keep going further upstream, the retailer has to buy from a wholesaler, and the wholesaler has to buy from a manufacturer. And what you're seeing here is what happens in reality. It's that the variability in demand and the variability in the order quantity becomes much higher as you move upstream in the supply chain. So that's what is called the bullwhip effect. And the idea is that because there's a time lag between when the customers actually purchase and the order gets placed to the retailer and then to the wholesaler and the manufacturer, as well as there's a time lag in how the product flows back from the manufacturer all the way to the consumer. This bullwhip effect seems to occur. So let's take a closer look at the bullwhip effect and why does it happen, because it's a very important purpose of supply chain management to try and reduce this bullwhip effect. So we try to reduce it by things that we do in supply chain management. So let's take a look at why it does occur. So a few reasons for it. One is batching of orders. Retailer batches orders. They wait 3 to 4 days or 7 days. They might have a regular cycle of ordering supplies from the wholesaler. Same thing with the wholesaler ordering from their supplier, and you keep going upstream in the supply chain, and kind of the same thing happens. There's batching of orders based on some time period that they may think of. Quantity discounts. These are things that are common in all kinds of products. If you buy more, you're going to get a quantity discount. What that does is that creates artificial demand. That might create some kind of a misinformation. So a retailer might buy more because of a quantity discount, and that can be some misinformation. That can cause more variation in the demand going upstream. Lead times. The fact that it takes some time for a product to go from the manufacturer all the way to the retailer and then to the customer means that every stage has to plan for a lead time. They have to think about how to cover that lead time, the safety stock for that lead time. That creates them having more inventory than they actually think they need for the immediate demands. They have some other safety stock, and that can cause more variation in the orders that they place. Demand signal processing, the idea that when a wholesaler sees a spurt in demand from a retailer, they may process it as an actual increase in demand when it's actually that the retailer is trying to take advantage of some discount, or is trying to maybe hedge against some expected shortage, or is expecting a really high demand for that particular week and is not going to expect that in the times after that week. And if that is not clarified to the wholesaler and further to the manufacturer, they may process that spurt in demand in a different way. Trade promotions, the same idea as quantity discounts. Trade promotions are you buy 4 cases and I'll give you a 5th one for free. What that does is creates these artificial buckets in which retailers buy. So they'll buy 12 when they need only 10, and they'll try to think about it in multiples of 4 because they're going to get the fifth one as free, and that will create more variation in how they place orders. Incentives for the sales force, same kind of thing as discounts. If you sell more this month, you're going to get a bonus, and that's going to cause artificial demand to get created. It'll create some artificial demand that might get adjusted in the coming weeks and months, and that's going to create fluctuations. It's going to go up and down because of those artificial spurts in demand that you're causing based on the incentives. Having an expected shortage, and therefore you might stock more of a particular product based on what you're expecting, or there might be a supplier who's giving less material than is being ordered based on some forecast that they have they may be able to get a price increase in the future, so they are hoarding the material even though they do have the material to sell. So again, that might cause some misinformation because the retailer might think, oh, when I order 100, I get only 80. How about if I order 120 and then I'll be able to get the exact quantity that I need? And that might cause some misinformation. So what happens because of all these things is you have situations, going back to this picture here, you have these situations where you might have a lot of stock at some point in time, and at the same time, at other times, you will have a situation where it goes down to zero inventory, and you have orders that are being not filled for your customers. So both of these situations can arise, and these arise because of things that we do in the normal course of business, day-to-day course of business. So these are oscillations or variations that come because of our normal ways of doing business. Next, let's look at some of the things that can happen that actually make this variation even worse. So these are disruptions that can make the bullwhip effect even worse. Changes to orders. If customers are allowed to change orders until the last minute, then there's added fluctuation based on changed orders. There'll be added fluctuations in terms of the inventory when you have changed orders. Late deliveries, when you're talking about lead time as causing some of the bullwhip effect, you're also adding to that bullwhip effect when deliveries are not reaching in the time that they're supposed to, and if there are quality issues. If you order 100 but only 80 are usable, then you try to adjust for that in your orders, and then you try to make up for that for the yield loss that you're going to have, and that's what can actually make the bullwhip effect even worse. So having a good quality management program or having a good forecast for your orders is always going to help in terms of reducing the bullwhip effect. In terms of internal disruptions that can make the bullwhip effect even worse, shortages of components. If you have a shortage of components and then you start making other products because you have a shortage of components for one product, you're making product that's not being demanded, that can cause the inventory of the wrong things to go up. And when you need the capacity for making the right things, you don't really have it. Changes to products, changing in terms of engineering changes to the products that you're making, if they're more frequent, they're only going to increase the variability in the supply, and that's going to make the bullwhip effect even worse. When you have new product introductions, you have less information about how the market's going to react to these new products and services, so that can increase the variation in terms of having too much or too little, having overstock or running out of product. If there are errors in terms of the orders, instead of ordering 1,000 cases, if the order went in for 100 cases or the other way around, that's going to cause excess inventory for a temporary period of time or less inventory for a temporary period of time. You might compensate in the next order, and that can be seen as a signal of increasing or decreasing demand, thereby increasing the variation in the demand and supply, again, making the bullwhip effect even worse. So these are the things that companies need to be aware of in terms of trying to reduce the bullwhip effect. There are some things that naturally occur. There are some things that are because of mistakes, and reducing the mistakes of those kinds helps reduce the bullwhip effect. What are some of the countermeasures that companies take? What are some of the things that companies have done in order to reduce this bullwhip effect? And the main idea is to use information exchange, which is more efficient than simply trying to exchange information based on your order. So giving your supplier or giving your buyer more information than is being exchanged simply by the price of the product or by the quantity of the product that's being ordered. Moving beyond that, not just giving a price if you are a supplier, but saying more about why that price is and what you're expecting in the future. And on this, in the same way for the buyer, giving an order and having more communication than that in terms of what are you expecting in terms of future orders, not just relying on price and quantities to be the surrogates for that information, giving more than that. You try to reduce the reasons for order batching. You try to reduce the reasons why companies try to hoard inventory, to hold inventory. So you reduce setup times. When you talk about quality management and lean manufacturing, we talk about the idea of reducing setup times, and among other things, that also helps reduce the bullwhip effect. Simply because when you reduce the setup time, the process is more flexible for moving from one product to the other, and therefore you don't need to hoard inventory or hold inventory, and therefore you can reduce the bullwhip effect in that way. Reducing the lead time for products, using combinations of make to stock and make to order, using mass customization, modular designs where you can put things together based on customer orders, are things that can help with reducing the reasons for batching orders. Countermeasures for the bullwhip effect, other countermeasures is reducing the use of the sales discounts that you give to customers, reducing the idea of promotions that you give to customers and to your salespeople, or at least being aware of them. Sometimes, because it's an industry standard, you're not able to get completely rid of them, but at least if you're aware of them, then you can say that, well, we know that because we offered this, there might be a spurt in demand based on this deal that the customers are getting, and that might not be a true signal of increasing demand. It's not a trajectory that's going to keep going that way. So take the increase in sales in this week with a grain of salt. Similarly, using rolling horizons for sales incentives, not just telling them based on end of month numbers, but looking at the last 3 months, the last 6 months, can help in terms of not having that artificial spurt in demand when it's time for their bonuses. If you can better manage inventory or reduce the need for having inventory, again, it all comes down to better ways in which you can keep your inventory or think about placing your orders. So point of sales data being transferred all the way to the manufacturer, the idea of Walmart having their data from their registers getting consolidated and going to Procter & Gamble as their supplier, and them knowing what to expect and what to order, what's less on the shelves. Using combined forecasting and analytics, using the power of big data, pooling inventories, so having central warehouses in terms of a large country where you're supplying products to different areas, but if you're pooling the inventories for many different areas, that can reduce the need for inventory, total need for inventory. Common parts for products so that you have less that you need to plan for in terms of components. Postponement of finishing of the product. So what is needed by the customer might be customized for the customer, but if you can make things in make to stock kind of environment, and then postponing the ultimate finishing for the customer can help. And last but not the least, the idea of quality control and just in time. Not having quality issues so that your supply is more predictable. forcing yourself to reduce setup times and getting into just-in-time deliveries can help you get better at managing the bullwhip effect. All right, time for a question here. So if you think of this, developing technology of additive manufacturing, what is also known as 3D printing, if you think about it, what that is talking about is being able to make whatever product you want from drawings for that product, and you can envision something like what we would see in Star Trek, right? You're talking about different molecules being transformed into a product and appearing in front of the customer when they need it. So that kind of technology, if you were to think about it, should have some impact on supply chains and how we think about supply chains. So what I'd like you to do is take a minute and think about how would this technology help reduce the bullwhip effect? What would it do in terms of reducing the bullwhip effect? So you would have thought of several things that something like 3D manufacturing would do. First thing is that it's producing the product right in the hands of the customer, right? The customer is actually printing out, is being able to manufacture that product right in their living room based on drawings, based on materials that you're getting. So it's going to reduce lead times, right? They think about a product and they go and download drawings for it. They have the material ready for it, and they're able to make it. The other thing that this kind of technology can bring is the idea of raw materials that can be used for many different products. So you're not thinking about particular components, you're not thinking about specific types of raw materials, but you're thinking about more versatile raw materials that are being developed. So in terms of keeping inventory of raw materials components, it reduces the need for that. So in terms of planning for inventory, it reduces the need for doing that because you're simply not keeping inventory of too many components and raw materials. In terms of customizing for the customer, you can, if there's the capability, if the capability develops for customers to add their little features to the product in addition to that drawing that they can download, then you can actually make the product exactly as the customer would want it. And finally, the idea of reduced lead time, right? You're not having a lead time for, if you need a product, you send the order, the supplier is going to process the order, and then they're going to put it in line for it to be manufactured. And it might take so many days for them to produce it, and then the transit time for it to get to you. All of that is getting reduced when you're looking at the idea of additive manufacturing or 3D printing, where you are able to make the product in much less time. So it would have a huge impact if this technology were to take off and land up in our living rooms so that we can make those products on our own. All right, so other than the idea of this revolutionary technology, if you were to think about, given that we're thinking about bullwhip effect and all of the things that supply chains need to think about, the idea of alignment among supply chain players is very important. So before we close off this idea of supply chains, we should think about what does alignment mean. And alignment simply means that all of the players in the supply chain are moving in the same direction. They have common objectives. And now companies, when they outsource and they build their supply chain, it's easy to overlook the fact that you're not communicating what the objectives are for you as well as for your suppliers and your buyers, and you're not exchanging that information. So it becomes important for you to do that. And the way you can do that is if you talk more, if you communicate more. So what are the key ideas here? Visibility, trusting your buyers and suppliers, and designing contracts, designing incentives such that everybody's objectives are aligned. They're going after the same types of things. So those are important aspects to think of as you are building your supply chain. And there are some programs that have become popular in the sense of aligning supply chains. So vendor managed inventory, in supply chains, we like to use a three-letter acronym, so VMI. So supply chain is SCM, VMI is vendor managed inventory. And vendor managed inventory simply means that as P&G, as the supplier for Walmart, P&G is managing the inventory in the warehouses or in the stores of Walmart, right, or in the stores of Sam's Club. So it's the supplier, this large supplier, managing the inventories in the stores that where the product is being sold. The other idea, not quite a 3-letter acronym here, we're talking about a 4-letter acronym, is CPFR. So it's collaborating right from the stage of your forecast, not just exchanging information about your daily sales, your weekly sales, but also in terms of forecasts. What do you expect as a retail store, and talking to your supplier, to your large supplier, and seeing what they expect. The advantage there is that you get the idea of consolidated information, you get the idea of planning for the future in a much better way when you have consolidated information across your suppliers and buyers. So moving beyond the idea of the bullwhip effect, even if we can take care of the bullwhip effect, or let's say that we don't have to worry about the bullwhip effect anymore, the idea that supply chains need to be agile and adaptable is becoming more and more prevalent in the academic literature as well as with practitioners. So what do we mean by agility and adaptability? And here the simple idea is that agile means being able to flex depending on how demand changes. So day-to-day changes, weekly changes in demand, and how a supply chain is able to flex to that. And adaptability means more in terms of the long term. Talking to suppliers in terms of new product development, talking to suppliers in terms of what is coming in terms of anticipated demand. So if these two components are being thought about, are being kept an eye on, it helps in general for the supply chain performance of any company, of any kind of supply chain. So we're talking more generally than simply looking at the bullwhip effect, and more generally than looking at a particular type of supply chain. All types of supply chains would benefit from these two aspects. Finally, to close off this lesson on supply chain management, you can think of contracts, you can think of incentives, you can think of trying to get your buyers and suppliers moving in the same direction based on things that you build structurally into your relationship with the supplier. But there's this other perspective of supply chain management that says there's nothing to beat the idea of building partnerships with supply chains. So building relationships with supply chains based on mutual respect. You select a supplier based on the idea that they're willing to work with you for a long term, and then you basically have open books that you share with them. They share their cost structure with you, you share your new product development, and it becomes a mutually beneficial relationship. So what happens there is you're trying to get the benefit of the specialized knowledge of your suppliers, but at the same time, you're not trying to keep them distant from you. You're sharing information with them and you're getting access to your information. So there's the idea of having a supply chain relationship. Now, what this means is that you reduce your supplier base. So this idea actually goes sort of counter to the idea of risk hedging. You say, I'm going to have fewer suppliers for my core products, and I'm going to work very closely with them. I'm not simply going to have multiple suppliers, because what if one supplier is not able to deliver, I go to the other one. I'm not going to think about it that way. I'm going to think about it more from working with that supplier. Providing continuous feedback at all levels, meaning at a day-to-day level in terms of continuous improvement of their processes, of things that go wrong. So if I'm a buyer and if there are defects in the components that are coming in, I'm simply not saying, you better send me better components. You're saying, well, let me work with you in terms of what is the problem with the components. Where are we either not communicating to you what our needs are, or how we can help you with the development of that component in terms of reducing the problems with that component. So providing the feedback to your supplier. Having better capabilities from your supplier. So even having supplier alliances, putting your suppliers together in terms of if you're buying the same component from multiple suppliers across the world, then putting them together and saying, let's learn from best practices from all the suppliers, right? Share information even across what would have been conventionally thought as competing suppliers. Two suppliers that are competing to sell a product to you. you're thinking of developing their capabilities based on cooperation between you and them and among the suppliers. Sharing information systematically and continuously all the time, and as we saw earlier, involving them in continuous improvement. Not just saying you need to have better quality, and not just saying you need to have lower costs in terms of helping them of their quality, in terms of helping them in terms of their cost reduction. You work with them, you help them with their cost reduction programs, and then share the benefits of this enlarged pie that you're able to make of better profits for the whole supply chain. So that's supply chain management for you.